They kept sending their floodwater into my yard. So one day I sent it back. Not with a lawsuit, not with a shouting match, just with dirt, stone, and a little patience. I live in a quiet subdivision outside Cedar Ridge, North Carolina. The kind of place where people wave when they drive by, but most don't know your middle name. Claire and I bought this house 12 years ago when our twins were still in elementary school, and what sold us was the backyard. It slopes away from the house, a big red maple off to the right, enough room for a grill, a dog run, and a strip of grass that felt kind underfoot. Summers here are dramatic. The sky will go that greenish gray, and something's coming, thunder rattling the windows, rain that hits like somebody flinging buckets. An hour later the sun's out and everything steams. That's how it rolls here, and you learn to take it. The first puddle showed up late May after one of those downpours. I was at the sink drying a plate and glanced out the window to see a wide patch of water near the back fence, a shallow silver mirror reflecting the clouds. It dried the next day, so I shrugged it off. Then the second storm rolled through, and that same corner turned from puddle into a little pond that sat for 3 days, the grass going that bruised, tired color. When I walked out, my boots sank half an inch and made that awful, soggy squelch. You know the sound, and I thought, okay, weird, but whatever. Across the fence, a house had just been renovated, new owners Brandon and his wife. He's the kind of guy who talks about resale like it's a hobby. Clean truck, fresh patio gutters that gleam. I'd met him once when they moved in, firm handshake, short, laugh, the friendly sort. Then I saw the pipe-white PVC about 4 inches sticking out from their back wall and aimed like a little cannon at my yard. I told myself contractors leave things like that someone would come by to bury it. But the next thunderstorm told me otherwise. I stood at the sink again, towel in hand, watching my neighbor's patio turn into a waterfall. Rain funneled off that slab, disappeared into the pipe, and blasted out in a steady, forceful arc right where my grass used to be. Not a trickle of jet that carved a shallow channel in minutes. Their yard stayed dry and usable. Mine got the swamp treatment. I felt something harden in me, that small, sharp mix of indignation and the decision that now the problem mattered. Downhill, man, he said, like it was a joke. Downhill, man, he said, like it was a joke. Yeah, but this is being directed, I told him. He leaned back and blamed the contractor, said it met code, and shut the door. 2 days later, the contractor left a voicemail system, meets code. Once water leaves the boundary, it's surface flow. Surface flow. The phrase stuck like a petty little stone in my shoe. I started paying attention in a new way. I measured the slope with a level and tape-walked the fence line until my knees were sore, stuck a cheap yardstick in the mud one afternoon and wrote down the depth, 2.5 inches, at the worst point. I filmed every storm from the kitchen window, time-stamped the clips, panned to the pipe on replay, narrated dates and times like a man putting together evidence for a case I hoped I wouldn't have to bring. The videos were ugly and methodical, an arc of water hitting the same spot, the same puddle forming the same little island of mosquito heaven in my backyard. Claire watched me with that amused, worried look spouses get. "You building a case?" she asked one evening, leaning against the counter. "Maybe," I said. "I just want to understand." She looked at the fence and said quietly, "It's not what's happening, it's that he doesn't care." Her voice made the problem personal in a different way. It wasn't only the water, it was the shrug. Late at night, I dug through county documents until my eyes blurred. There it was in a dry PDF, a line that mattered: you cannot concentrate. Stormwater discharge and direct it onto an adjacent property. Diffuse flow is fine. Directed discharge is not. I read it 3 times. That line felt like a lamp flipping on. Still, I didn't want the county letters or the escalation. I wanted my yard back and to keep the neighborhood something we could still stand in on barbecue day. Then the HOA email arrived about exterior improvements needing approval, and things narrowed. I'd overheard Brandon on the phone, proud of getting approval for the patio and the drainage plan intentional. The more I watched, the less this felt like an unfinished contractor quirk. I called Miguel, who'd done small jobs for us before steady, precise quiet. Miguel walked the yard, crouched down, squeezed a handful of soil through his fingers and said, "This isn't just rain, it's being fed." Miguel surprised me with a piece I hadn't expected. He'd worked on municipal projects, and he recognized the contractor's little signature shortcuts. He didn't sling accusations. He just said some designs make it easy to hide problems and cheap to shift them elsewhere. He sketched a plan on a scrap of cardboard, a low berm along the fence stone edging compacted soil and a gravel core to absorb and redirect. "Make it look like a garden," he said. "Don't make it look like a fix." That line stuck with me. I didn't want a trench or a monument to passive aggression. I wanted something sensible and subtle. 2 days later, Miguel's crew arrived. They worked quiet and tidy, tamping setting stones, planting ornamental grasses. When they finished, it looked like it had always been there, a tasteful raised bed that said, "This is mine," without yelling. The next thunderstorm was the test. Rain hammered the roof. The pipe did its cannon impression. The water hit the berm and flattened, then spread sideways like an animal that's hit a fence and is looking for a way. It found the low point on his property and slunk around the corner into Brandon's unfinished side yard. I watched because watching mattered to see where the path of least resistance led now. I didn't cheer. I felt the small, clean satisfaction of something finally visible in the right place. 2 days later, Brandon knocked. He stood on my porch shoes, muddy jaw tight. "My side yard's been soaked," he said, sounding worn. "It didn't used to be like that." "Did you change something?" I told him the truth. "I built a berm to stop direct discharge into my lawn." His shoulders sagged like a man carrying a surprise he wished he'd avoided. "The contractor said it met code," he muttered. He ran a hand through his hair and then almost sheepishly asked, "What would fix it?" There was no heat in the question, just consequence. We talked like grown men who'd both been busy making their own little worlds neat. I recommended a soakaway, an underground extension, and a gravel pit on his side to disperse water slowly into soil instead of firing it across the fence. He hired a crew, they dug, they installed, and I watched the correction happen from my kitchen window like someone watching stitches being tied. The next storm was the real exam. Rain came down, gutters roared, and I stood at the sink like a man checking a result. The water left the patio, entered the pipe, and disappeared underground into the soakaway on his side. No jet, no crater, no new pond in my grass. The lawn was wet in the ordinary, honest way rain makes things wet. My dog ran through it without hesitation. For the first time in months, that back corner looked like it belonged to me again, and when Brandon waved at me, bringing in the trash cans, it was a different kind of wave, not the stiff nod of tolerance, but the small, embarrassed grin of a neighbor who should have looked sooner. I never filed a complaint. I didn't want to weaponize rules against the people next door. What I did was set a boundary that honored both the letter of the law and the life we shared on this block. Water follows the path of least resistance, just like people and systems. If you leave yourself open, the mess will run right through you, not always out of malice, but often out of convenience. Sometimes the person doing it isn't a villain, they're just protecting their own feet. The twist at the end of all this wasn't only mechanical. Miguel's quiet, well-crafted berm did more than reroute water, it rerouted conversations. Neighbors started asking for Miguel's card. Brandon began saying a little awkwardly, "Should have handled it differently," and the HOA notices calmed down. The berm made the problem visible where it belonged and forced a choice: fix it properly or live with the swamp. He fixed it. If there's a moral, it's this: protect your space, but do it in ways that reveal truth without burning bridges. Boundaries aren't just lines on a map, they're small, deliberate acts that teach people how to treat you. Building that berm wasn't revenge, it was clarity. It was patience and design and a refusal to be the path of least resistance. So, was I right to handle it this way? Should I have filed the complaint from the start and let the county decide? Or was the berm a fair, practical response? Passive-aggressive, gardening, or smart stewardship? Tell me. Drop your stories about boundaries you had to build, whether with soil and stone, with contracts, or with conversations. If this landed for you, share it with a neighbor who needs to see that sometimes the quietest fixes are the most powerful.